Richard Cirminiello of College Football News. This interview, by the way, brought to you by Cleveland Clinic, where you can call today for an appointment at 216-444-CARE. And hopefully, Richard, you won't have to call for an appointment for a lot of years, my friend.
I agree. I hope so.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Always better when I'm on the air with you, Bruce.
I want to talk about the BCS first. I'm a little foggy on a few things. I guess there's 3 proposals out there. It won't kick in till 2014. Looks like they want to make New Year's Day special again. So far, what I hear and understand, I like. But share your expertise on what you know, please.
I totally agree with you. I think the pulse right now, the buzz that I'm getting is all positive. I don't think there's any turning back. I think we're headed toward a playoff. It's not going to be anything beyond 4 teams, which I know will disappoint a lot of people. So at least for the foreseeable future, forget about 8, forget about 16, but 4 appears to be on the table. And now it really is going to come down to those proposals that you discussed and then some of the finer details. When are they played? Where are they played, and really what will be the methodology to get us to those 4 teams, because the death of the BCS is now upon us. We have 2012 and 2013 to live with it, but at that point, 2014, we're going to have to decide, how do we determine those 4 teams? Do we look at certain conference champions and take out the subjectivity, or do we use, again, some combination of polls or computers or some kind of a super group to decide? So those are the fine details, but the bottom line is we are taking, in my opinion, a gigantic step forward in moving to a 14 playoff. Maybe
it was a blessing in disguise that we had LSU and Alabama as a rematch, because didn't that stir the pot?
I think it might have been one of the final straws. I really think that pot has been stirred for many years. I think it's kind of been a real boiling point that we reached. It's been a series of issues that we've had, and it's been this constant cacophony. People like you and I and many thousands of others who have talked about a better system for the postseason, more of a celebration of college football in the postseason. And I think, lagging attendance at a lot of bowl games, viewership being down, a general malaise regarding to the postseason, I think that adds to it as well. So this is an opportunity to improve the situation. Now, listen, number 5 team, number 6 team, they're still going to have a beef, but I have always said that to go from 2 competitors to 4 competitors, that is vastly different. And if you look at the history, Bruce, very rarely do you have that number 5 or number 6 team having a really legitimate beef as a national championship contender. So I'm very, very excited over where this is headed.
And also, Richard, with teams 5, 6, and 7 that may inevitably have a beef, it again shows the importance of the regular season.
Yeah, and that's not lost in this process, and that's an excellent point that you bring up, and I think everyone involved really wanted to maintain the integrity of that regular season, and I completely agree. That's one of the things that has always sort of frightened me if we went to an NFL-style playoff system where you could have as many as 16 teams. That would possibly water down the regular season, and now we have the luxury of every week being so paramount to that national championship chase. And I don't think that changes if you have 4 teams at all. The one sticking point that I think I'm going to lose on at the end, and this is just from me reading the tea leaves, I'd really like to see the regular season be enhanced even further by having that number 1 and number 2 seed actually host the game. I think there's a real sort of visceral feel that I would get if you had cold weather games being a part of that semifinal round, if you could play in the Midwest, if you had teams from the South or the West having to travel to places like Ann Arbor or Columbus, I think would be fantastic. But From what I'm gathering from talking to people, it looks as if it's going to be neutral site for those semifinal games, which I think is a lost opportunity.
You know what, though, Richard? I in an ideal world, I agree with you, but common sense has got to prevail. I read a piece by somebody leading up to my interview with you today that made, I thought, an excellent point. Take a couple of years ago with TCU. Let's say they'd have been 1 or 2 in the country. They were right there. Their stadium only holds 45,000. And do they have the hotel accommodations there or in Ann Arbor or, you know, in a lot of college cities, they just wouldn't be able to accommodate a game of this magnitude.
It's a fair point, and I think there are some great debates on both sides. I think at the end of the day, I might be in the minority in that belief, and maybe it's not even feasible. I do think it's unfortunate that you could have, you know, a team that is perfect and number 1 seeded. I think you can give them an additional bonus, not just for them, but for their fans as well. And then you start to get into the factors also of, you know, is it a disservice to some of those fans to have to possibly, not that they have to go, but now it's kind of tougher to go to 2 of those neutral site games, a semifinal and possibly a championship game. So, you know, again, I think there's great sides to that debate, but at the end of the day, I think you're going to see neutral sites bidded out in those semifinal games to particular cities, and then obviously neutral site for the championship game as well.
So I don't know with the current cycle that we're in that the Southeastern Conference is so far and away the best conference in the country. I don't know if we can avoid the venues being in their backyard because of the climate.
Well, you know, West Coast. Strong possibility, too. I mean, you could certainly be in Arizona, Fiesta Bowl type site. You know, you could be out in Pasadena.
Right.
You can go to neutral sites. You know, you could move to, you know, Dallas with the new stadium that Jerry has there.
Right.
Kind of quasi-SEC country now with Texas A&M being a part of the SEC. But I think there's a lot of options. You could also have... heck, you could be in Indianapolis. You could play indoors.
Well, there you go.
Not my favorite thing to do.
Sure.
But I think those are possibilities as well.
I never thought of the the NCAA Finals, the Super Bowl. I mean, they're used to. That's a good point. You could go to northern cities that have domes, no question about it.
Yeah, and one other side. I just want to throw this in there as well. One of the beefs that I've had for a long period of time is the long delay that you have from the end of the regular season, even if it's championship weekend in early December. And I think for a lot of players and also a lot of fans, you just lose a lot of steam throughout the month of December because there's such a long period of time before you have meaningful college football.
Yeah, but how do you avoid that
with that as well?
How do you avoid that with a 14 playoff?
Well, I think that semifinal weekend at least is earlier than what we have right now. Now we're having a national championship game that is, you know, January 8th, January 9th, January 10th. It's that far away from that first weekend of December. If you now have that semifinal weekend, maybe a week to 10 days prior to that championship game, I'd like to see it all culminate on New Year's Day. I agree that we've lost a lot of what you and I grew up with, which is that really magnificent memory of what New Year's Day meant and the tie-ins with college football.
Yeah, I read one report, a proposal that they would talk about having the semis on New Year's Day.
That would be fantastic.
And then still have it the following week in January. Be, you know, I could live with that too. Hey, the bottom line is this is going to be such a dramatic improvement. Now, here's the sticky point I want to throw at you. I am opposed adopting a playoff system that only is conference champions. And this last year's a perfect example. Yep. Richard, if 3 of the 4 teams come from the Southeastern Conference, I don't like it, but so be it. They're the best teams in the country.
Could not agree with you more. And I don't understand the other side of the argument. I know, again, you want to celebrate and you want to champion that league winner, and I understand that, but I want to see it. We're going to move to this kind of a system, which is designed to give us the 4 best teams in the country vying for a national championship, then I agree with you. I wouldn't prefer it to be 3 teams from one conference, but if those are 3 of the 4 best teams in the country, then by God, I want to see them have that opportunity to win a national championship. So I have no problem with it. The SEC is the best conference in the country, and I understand that and I accept that, but a lot of that is cyclical. And I'm not saying that SEC is going to be number 4 a few years from now, because it's not going to happen. But I think last year was a bit of an anomaly, and I don't think we would expect to see that on a regular basis, where you have 2, possibly more teams. Arkansas was in the mix towards the end of last year. Listen, I want to see the 4 best teams, and I think that's exactly where we should be headed with it.
Now, the Big Ten apparently it could still pose a problem, and I hope not, because let's say either the Pac-12 as it is now, or the Big Ten has one of their 2 championship teams is in the top 4, or both. The integrity of the Rose Bowl will still be intact, because heck, the runner-up from the Big Ten and the runner-up from the Pac-12, there's a lot of people who would argue that Stanford was still the better team over Oregon this last year, even though Oregon beat them.
Yeah, I agree. And the Big Ten is always going to put forth a terrific number 2 program with the depth that you have in that conference, especially now with the addition of Nebraska. I don't think you'd have any problem putting 2 powerhouse, possibly top 15 teams against one another in the Rose Bowl. And listen, I agree with you, Bruce. I hope it doesn't get down to a point where one of those conferences or the Rose Bowl really has an impact on this process, because you and I have been saying on the air for years, it's a minor tweak. This is not a major change to the system. To go from 2 teams to 4 teams competing for a national championship, 1 extra round prior to the national championship, it really doesn't, it's not tumultuous to the system, but it makes such a big difference to what happens in the postseason, and it makes a big difference to those of us who are really fans of this game. So I'm hoping that there are no roadblocks that prevent what now appears to be inevitable.
Is this system, though, going to be approved and backed, and is it indeed fair to the Boise States and the TCUs of the world?
Well, I think that depends what happens to the bowl system going forward. And I think it really depends on the how much participation the bowls have to these semifinal and national championship games, because we're still going to have a bowl system. I think that's a foregone conclusion. We're still going to have the full
which is a good thing.
Games. We're still going to have, we may not be calling them BCS bowl games in the future, but we're still going to have, obviously, the Rose Bowls, the Fiesta Bowls, the Sugar Bowls. And depending upon their involvement with the playoff, you could still have the Boise States and the TCUs and the Utahs partaking in major bowl games, in big events that bring a lot of money to those schools. So I don't really think it changes that dynamic at all going forward.
Does it mean, though, that those schools might have to schedule a reputable BCS conference, for our purposes, a reputable BCS conference opponent in an early season non-conference game, when the Ohio States and the Alabamas, they don't have to?
Well, here's 2 things. Number one, they've always had to in the past. Boise State had to, go play in the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic and beat Georgia in the Georgia Dome. That was always the case, number one. But number 2, the landscape has changed for Boise State. They're headed to the Big East, so their scheduling is going to be a lot tougher than it had been in the past in the WAC or the Mountain West. TCU, that was one of the darlings, the Cinderellas. They're now headed towards the Big 12 this season. Utah, now a member of the Pac-12. So the number of those schools that would be legitimate BCS buster contenders really now are in BCS conferences. So what are we left with? I mean, there are a smattering of schools that are out there. Houston is now headed to the Big East. But who's really left?
Yeah.
That's going to be sort of, the ugly duckling that can't get into the big game. Not many of those schools left any longer.
I forgot Boise State. How ludicrous is that, Richard?
I think you intentionally tried to forget it, because I am too.
What is this world coming to? Boise State, the last time I looked, is in Utah, and they're in the Big East.
Boise State is in the Big East, and guess what? what? They're not the furthest west school in the Big East because that's
they're not even in Utah. They're in Idaho, for God's sake. Unbelievable. Listen, I got to ask you about a couple of players. You're a college football expert and specialist, but you're an NFL fan too.
Yeah.
How is Weeden the guy for the Browns? Is he going to be the elite coach? See, I contend, I've been telling our viewers over and over and over again till they're so sick of hearing my gravelly voice. 46 Super Bowls, Richard. 43 of them have had a champion with an elite upper echelon quarterback, even if it was only for that one single year. The only exceptions were Johnson, Dilfer, and Hostetler. Is Weeden going to be that guy for Cleveland, do you think?
I really don't think so. I did a lot of work on the NFL draft, did a lot of work for the New York Jets over the past couple of weeks in preparation for the draft, and really had a chance to kind of dig in deep on a lot of these prospects. I like Brandon Weeden as a college quarterback. I'm not sure if he translates into that elite NFL quarterback. Obviously, his age is a factor, but his age isn't going to be a factor in 2012, 13, 14. He's still going to be a young quarterback by NFL standards. But when I watched him last year, Bruce, lots of mistakes. I think he has a lot of maturation that has to take place in terms of reading defenses, reading the routes of his wide receivers. So I think he's still somewhat raw. You know, he's not going to have the Mike Gundys, the Justin Blackman, the major advantages that offense had over Big 12 defenses. So at number 22, I'll be honest, I thought that was a very curious pick in going with Brandon Weeden.
Real quickly, what's your thoughts on Tannehill and his potential in the pros?
Yeah, Tannehill, you know, I mean, obviously he's getting a lot of grief. Number 8, he's got a long way to go, but I think even at number 8, I think he's a worthwhile investment. I think he has a higher ceiling than Brandon Weeden does. I like the kid from an intangible standpoint, but physically he's terrific, very good athlete. Not sure if having Mike Sherman as the offensive coordinator with the Dolphins, not sure if that's good or bad, because I'm not a big Mike Sherman fan as far as what he did at Texas A&M. So I think if people are patient, I know that's very difficult with a first-round quarterback. I like the future of Ryan Tannehill.
It's always a pleasure, Richard. Talk to you in a couple of months.
Thanks, Bruce.